The first thing Liam registered was the light. It was a merciless, fluorescent hum, pressing down on his eyelids, insisting they open. He resisted, clinging to the soft, formless dark that had been his home for how long? The dark was comfortable. The light was an intrusion. But the light and the low, beeping rhythm to his right were persistent. With the groan of a rusted hinge, his eyes fluttered open. The world was a smear of white and pale green. A ceiling, tiled. One tile had a faint water stain, a tiny, beige cloud in his sterile sky. He blinked, and the world swam into a semblance of focus. A hospital room. The rhythmic beep was a machine beside his bed, its green line jumping with the steady beat of his own heart. And Forstan stood like a silent, skeletal butler, a clear bag dripping life into his arm. His body felt like a foreign country, distant and numb, yet simultaneously filled with a dull, pervasive ache. He tried to speak, but only a dry rasp escaped his throat. A nurse, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, noticed his stirring. "Mr. Sterling? Liam? Can you hear me?" He managed a slow, deliberate nod. It felt like lifting a boulder. "Oh, thank God," she breathed, her professionalism momentarily cracking to reveal genuine relief. "Welcome back. You've given us all quite a scare. I'm going to get Dr. Evans." Dr. Evans. The name meant nothing. The nurse bustled out, and Liam was left alone with the beeping and the stained ceiling tile. He tried to take inventory. His mind felt like a dusty attic, memories stored in cobweb boxes. There was an accident. The thought surfaced like a bubble in a swamp. Metal screeching. The smell of rain on hot asphalt. The shocking, crystalline shatter of a windshield. He had been driving home from a site visit. A truck had run a red light. He remembered a flash of his wife's face. Isabella. Beautiful, vibrant, perfect Isabella. A wave of desperate longing washed over him. He needed to see her. He needed to know she was okay. When Dr. Evans entered, a tall man with a calm demeanor, Liam's first croaked word was her name. "Isabella." Dr. Evans smiled, a gentle, reassuring gesture. "Your wife is fine, Liam. She's been here nearly every day. She's a strong woman." He began the routine checks, shining a light in Liam's eyes, testing his reflexes. "You were in a very serious accident, a severe traumatic brain injury, among other things. You've been in a coma, Liam." A coma. The word hung in the air, heavy and unreal. It explained the gaps, the feeling of lost time. "How long?" he whispered, his voice still a ghost of its former self. The doctor paused, his expression softening with sympathy. "It's been 10 months. 10 months." The number was incomprehensible. A lifetime. Nearly a year of his existence had been erased, spent in the silent darkness. His mind reeled. His projects at the firm, his life, his world, all of it had marched on for 10 months without him. He felt a surge of panic, a desperate need for an anchor. "Isabella," he said again, more forcefully this time. "I need to see her." "Of course," Dr. Evans said. "She's in the waiting room. I'll send her in. But Liam, take it easy. This is a lot to process. Your body has been through a significant ordeal. Your mind will need time to catch up." The doctor left, and the minutes stretched into an eternity. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that outpaced the steady beep of the monitor. He was going to see his wife. Her face would be the anchor in this storm. Her smile would make everything right again. The door opened, and there she was, Isabella. Her blonde hair was pulled back, but she was as elegant as ever, dressed in a tasteful cream-colored maternity dress. Maternity dress. Liam's brain, slow and sluggish, tried to process the image. The gentle, unmistakable swell of her abdomen. It wasn't a small swell. It was a pronounced, defined, impossible-to-miss curve. She was pregnant. Very pregnant. He stared, his thoughts short-circuiting. The math was simple, brutal, and instant. He had been in a coma for 10 months. His wife, standing before him, was, by the look of it, about 8 months pregnant. The numbers did not add up. They could not add up. They created an equation of pure betrayal. Isabella walked toward him, her expression not one of joyful relief, but of weary annoyance, as if his waking was an inconvenient interruption. She stopped a few feet from the bed, her arms crossed protectively over her swollen belly. "Liam," she said, her voice cool and distant. "So you're finally awake." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. He couldn't speak. He could only stare at her stomach, the physical manifestation of a world that had not waited for him, of a life that had been lived in his absence. The joy of his return to consciousness curdled into a cold, sickening dread. He had woken up not to a homecoming, but to the scene of a crime. He thought he had lost 10 months of his life. He didn't know that in waking, he was about to lose everything he thought was his. Within 1 hour, the truth would begin its slow, merciless unraveling. What Isabella didn't know was that the quiet, accommodating architect she had married was not the only man in that bed. The man who had built a secret empire while she thought he was just drawing blueprints was waking up, too. And he was about to draft a new reality for them all. This story is a powerful one, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the quiet strength that often goes unnoticed. If you're enjoying this journey of revelation and justice, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We love hearing from you, so tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the moment the world shifted. The silence in the room was a physical thing, thick and suffocating. Liam's gaze remained fixed on Isabella's stomach. Each beat of the heart monitor seemed to punctuate his dawning horror. Beep. 10 months. Beep. 8 months pregnant. Beep. Impossible. Isabella finally sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "Liam, can you please look at me? Not my stomach. It's unseemly." He forced his eyes upward, meeting hers. The warmth he remembered, the easy affection that had been the bedrock of their marriage, was gone. In its place was a hard, polished surface, like expensive, cold marble. "Bella," he managed, the name a shard of glass in his throat. "What? What do you think?" she snapped, her voice low and sharp. Life went on, Liam. Did you expect everyone to just stop? To put everything on hold indefinitely because you decided to play chicken with a Mack truck? The cruelty of the statement was breathtaking. It was a calculated strike designed to wound and disorient. He had been the victim of an accident, a fact she delivered as if it were a personal failing, a selfish indulgence on his part. "It was an accident," he heard himself say, his voice a faint echo of its usual calm. "Everything is an accident with you," she retorted, shifting her weight. The movement seemed to highlight the baby bump, turning it into a weapon. The accidental deletion of the designs for the Miller project. The accidental stain on my dress before the gala. It's a pattern of carelessness. He remembered those incidents. The Miller project designs were sabotaged by a jealous junior associate, a mess Liam had quietly cleaned up without naming names to protect a young career. The stain was from a waiter stumbling, and he had spent an hour calming a near-hysterical Isabella. In his memory, he was the hero of those stories, the steady hand. In her telling, he was the bumbling fool. It was a small, disorienting glimpse into how she had rewritten their history. "We need to talk about practicalities," she said, her tone shifting to that of a brisk, efficient CEO discussing a failing subsidiary. Her brother, Julian, appeared at the door, leaning against the frame with a practiced, casual arrogance. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, his suit immaculate, his smirk a permanent fixture. "He's awake, then," Julian said, not to Liam, but to Isabella. Took his time. Liam felt a fresh wave of disorientation. Julian was Isabella's younger brother, a slick financial advisor who had always treated Liam with a thinly veiled condescension. He'd always considered Liam's profession as an architect to be a quaint, if respectable, way to make a middle-class living, worlds away from his own high-stakes world of finance. Liam had tolerated him for Isabella's sake, but his presence now felt like a circling vulture. "Julian is going to help," Isabella announced. "With the transition." "Transition?" Liam asked, the word tasting like poison. "Your assets, Liam. Your finances," Julian said, stepping into the room. He held a leather-bound folio. "Frankly, they're a mess. We've been trying to keep things afloat for the past 10 months, but your portfolio is, well, it's rather pedestrian. Conservative. Low yield. We need to liquidate some things to cover your ongoing medical expenses." He said as if he and Isabella were a unified front, a corporate entity managing the unfortunate and unprofitable division that was Liam Sterling. They stood together, Isabella with her swollen belly and Julian with his leather folio, a portrait of confident control. They were discussing his life's work, his savings, his future, as if he were a line item on a balance sheet. Liam's mind, though foggy, was starting to clear. The initial shock was being replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He was not among friends. He was not in the care of a loving wife. He was a problem to be managed, an asset to be liquidated. "My firm," Liam started. "Sterling Designs." Julian let out a short, pitying laugh. "Ah yes, the little boutique firm. Bella told me. Quaint. It's barely breaking even, from what we can tell. The overhead must be eating you alive. We think the most prudent move is to sell the company name and the client list. It won't be much, but every little bit helps." Sterling Designs wasn't a boutique firm. It was the public-facing, deliberately modest entity Liam used for his local, personal projects. It was a passion, a way to stay grounded. It was also the perfect cover. No one, not even Isabella, knew that Sterling Designs was a wholly owned subsidiary of the L.S. Collective, a global architectural and urban planning consortium he had built from the ground up with his mentor, a man named Mr. Chun. L.S. for Liam Sterling. It was a secret he had kept, not out of malice, but because he enjoyed the simplicity of his life with Isabella. He had wanted her to love him, the quiet architect, not the anonymous tycoon behind some of the world's most ambitious building projects. It seemed his test had yielded its results. He watched them, this pair, so confident in their assessment of him. They saw a broken man, a simple man, a man whose net worth they had likely calculated to the penny based on his public records. They saw a man they could control. He felt a strange calm settle over him. This was not a disaster. This was a diagnostic test. He had been presented with a problem, a structural failure in the foundation of his life. And Liam Sterling was, above all, a man who solved problems. He let his head rest back on the pillow, feigning exhaustion. He closed his eyes. "I'm tired," he murmured. "Of course you are," Isabella said, her voice softening into a patronizing coo. "You just rest, Liam. Julian and I will handle everything. We'll bring some papers for you to sign in a few days, once you're stronger." "Papers," he repeated, his eyes still closed. "Just formalities," Julian said smoothly. "Power of attorney. Things to give us the flexibility to manage your affairs for you. For your own good." Liam didn't respond. He kept his breathing slow and even a perfect imitation of a man drifting back to sleep. He heard them whisper. "See? He's too weak to argue," Julian murmured. "This will be easier than we thought. Just get it done," Isabella replied, her voice tight. "I want this settled before the baby comes." They left. The door clicked shut, leaving Liam alone once more in the silent, sterile room. But the room was no longer a prison. It was a command center. He opened his eyes. The fog was gone. In its place was a crystalline, diamond-hard resolve. They thought he was weak. They thought he was a mess. They thought he was theirs to manage. They had underestimated him. It was a fatal, structural flaw in their design. And Liam Sterling was an expert at identifying and exploiting structural flaws. He slowly, painfully reached for the hospital-issued tablet on the bedside table. His fingers, clumsy from disuse, fumbled with the screen. He had 10 months of emails to read. He had work to do. The game had begun, and they didn't even know they were playing. The days that followed formed a new, strange routine. By day, Liam was the model patient. He was quiet, compliant, and seemingly weak. He ate the bland hospital food without complaint, worked diligently with a physical therapist to regain strength in his atrophied limbs, and answered the doctor's questions with a simple, placid demeanor. He played the part of the recovering coma patient perfectly. When Isabella and Julian visited, which they did with a grim sense of duty, He was passive and tired. He would listen with his eyes closed as they discussed his life in the third person, their voices a low murmur of financial jargon and legal maneuvering. "The downtown apartment has to go," Julian would say, tapping on his tablet. "The mortgage is a drain, and the market is hot. We can put the proceeds into a high-yield fund that I manage. It's the smart play." "What about his car?" Isabella would ask, examining her nails. "The vintage convertible. It's just sitting in the garage. Sentimental value." Julian would scoff. "Sentiment doesn't pay for round-the-clock nursing care, Bella. It's an asset. It needs to be liquidated." Liam would just lie there, the steady beep of the monitor his only commentary. He let them believe he was a shell, a man so broken by his trauma that he was incapable of comprehension. He let them see what they wanted to see, a problem being efficiently solved. Their arrogance was a shield for him, a cloak of invisibility. They were so busy congratulating themselves on their cleverness that they never once thought to look closer. But when the lights in the hospital wing dimmed and the night staff began their quiet rounds, a different Liam emerged. The hospital tablet, a tool they assumed he used for playing simple games or watching movies, became his window to the world. His fingers, once clumsy, grew nimble and quick. The muscle memory returned. His first act was to access a series of encrypted email accounts. He used a complex sequence of login protocols he had designed himself, a digital fortress that had kept his two lives entirely separate. The unread emails numbered in the thousands. He began to triage, his mind sharp and analytical. He sorted them into folders: Sterling Designs, S Collective, Personal, and a new one he created and labeled Isabella. The emails from his team at Sterling Designs were filled with concern, then sadness, then a determined effort to keep his small firm running in his honor. His heart ached with a mixture of pride and guilt. He had good people. He fired off a brief, encrypted message to his office manager, a woman named Maria who had been with him for a decade. "Maria, I am back. Say nothing. Observe and report. Full briefing soon." The reply came within minutes, a burst of frantic, joyful, and utterly confused messages, which he quickly quelled with another command. "Discretion is paramount. Await instructions." Next, he turned to the S Collective. This was the mothership. The emails here were from a different world. Progress reports on the Oasis Tower in Dubai, material stress test results for a new polymer to be used in the subaquatic Poseidon project in Monaco, and frantic messages from his partner, the venerable Mr. Chun, in Hong Kong. He found the email chain he was looking for, titled S Status. In it, Mr. Chin had meticulously outlined the protocol enacted the moment Liam had been declared unresponsive. All of Liam's voting rights and executive powers in the collective had been placed into a secure, time-locked trust, managed by a neutral third party in Switzerland. The trust could only be unlocked by a voice print and retinal scan from Liam himself, or upon legal confirmation of his death. For 10 months, his multi-billion-dollar empire had been in a state of suspended animation, perfectly preserved. Mr. Chun, bless his strategic mind, had also initiated a ghost protocol, feeding deliberately minimal and occasionally misleading information to public financial trackers, making the S Collective appear dormant, and its reclusive founder, known only as LS, seemed to have vanished. To the world, a ghost had disappeared. To Julian's superficial credit checks, Liam Sterling looked exactly like what he appeared to be, a moderately successful architect with a few stocks and a mortgage. Liam drafted a careful email to Mr. Chun. "The dragon sleeps no more. Situation is delicate. Require full asset and intelligence report on Julian Croft and Isabella Sterling, née Croft. Silent running. Prepare for activation." The final folder was Isabella. He had set up a keylogger and tracker on her devices years ago. It was a precaution he took for all his key personnel, a habit from the cutthroat world of corporate architecture. He had never thought to use it on his own wife, and the fact that it existed filled him with a sour taste. But now it was a necessary tool. He activated the backdoor access. It was all there. 10 months of a life lived without him. Text messages, emails, social media posts. The story unfolded in stark, digital clarity. The initial shock of his accident quickly gave way to inconvenience. Her messages to Julian and her friends were filled with complaints about the hospital visits, the disruption to her social life. Then, about 2 months in, a new name appeared in her texts. Mark, a tennis pro at their country club. The messages started innocently enough. Flirtatious banter. Then they grew more heated. Secret meetings. Hotel receipts, charged to a credit card Liam didn't know she had. And then, the confirmation he dreaded but knew was coming. A panicked text to her best friend. I'm late. It's Mark's. What do I do? The friend's reply. Liam will never know. He's a vegetable. This could be a blessing, Bella. A way out. A blessing. Her husband's near-death experience and subsequent coma. A blessing. The coldness in Liam's chest solidified into a block of ice. This wasn't a simple mistake, a moment of weakness. This was a calculated, opportunistic betrayal, aided and abetted by her entire circle. He found the subsequent messages where she and Julian hatched their plan. They would present the baby as a miracle, conceived just before the accident. They would use his incapacitation to seize control of his finances, which they deemed insufficient for the lifestyle they desired, and optimize them under Julian's guidance. The plan was audacious in its cruelty. He leaned back, the tablet's glow illuminating his grim face. The physical therapy, the slow rebuilding of his body, was no longer just about recovery. It was about preparation. Every leg lift, every careful step between the parallel bars was an act of rebellion. He was forging a new man from the wreckage of the old one, a man who would not be underestimated again. One afternoon, Isabella and Julian arrived with a stack of documents and a notary. Liam was sitting in a chair by the window, a blanket over his legs. He looked pale and diminished. Perfect. Good afternoon, Liam, Julian said, his voice oozing false sympathy. We have some papers for you, just to make things easier on everyone. He spread them out on the bedside table. A durable power of attorney. A document giving Julian full trading authority over his investment accounts. A sales agreement for his apartment. We just need your signature on the highlighted lines, Isabella said softly, holding out a pen. It was a beautiful silver fountain pen he had given her for their second anniversary. The irony was so thick he could taste it. Liam looked at the papers. He looked at their eager, predatory faces. He looked at the pen. He let his hand tremble slightly as he reached for it. He could sign them. He could let them walk out of this room thinking they had won. He could let them complete their crime, digging their own graves deeper and deeper. The temptation for that level of poetic justice was immense. But another part of him, the builder, the architect, knew that a controlled demolition was always cleaner. He let his hand drop. I need to think, he said, his voice a soft murmur. My head, it's still so cloudy. Julian's mask of patience slipped for a fraction of a second. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he smoothed it over. Of course, Liam. Of course. We'll leave them with you. Take your time. We'll come back tomorrow. They left, confident that a day's delay was meaningless. Liam watched them go. He picked up the pen Isabella had left behind. The silver was cool and heavy in his hand. He didn't look at the documents they had brought. He turned back to his tablet and began to draft a different set of papers entirely. He was not just a patient recovering. He was a strategist planning his next move on a board they didn't even know existed. Tomorrow, he thought, would be a very interesting day. The next few weeks were a masterclass in deception. Liam played his part with an actor's dedication, creating a narrative of slow, fragile recovery. He would have good days and bad days. On good days, he would engage in simple conversation, asking about the weather or a sports team, reinforcing their belief that his mind was occupied with trivialities. On bad days, he would be withdrawn and confused, staring out the window for hours, a performance that spurred Isabella and Julian to become more brazen, more confident in his utter helplessness. They would hold their strategy sessions right in his room, lowering their voices to conspiratorial whispers that were still perfectly audible. Liam, with his eyes closed, would listen to the orchestration of his own dismantling. The offer on the apartment is solid, Julian said one afternoon, scrolling through his phone. But I think we can get another 5% if we close within the week. I told the realtor the owner is incapacitated and the family is eager to sell. And his art collection? Isabella asked. She was flipping through a fashion magazine, a picture of domestic boredom. That hideous metal sculpture he loves so much. The Continuum? It's worth a surprising amount, Julian admitted begrudgingly. An auction house in Zurich is interested. We just need his signature to release it. Liam remained still, his breathing even. The Continuum was a piece he had commissioned from a then-unknown artist who had since become world-famous. It was a symbol of his own philosophy, a complex, interwoven structure that looked chaotic from one angle and perfectly harmonious from another. Like his life, like his business, they saw a hideous metal sculpture. He saw a testament to hidden order. Their inability to see its value was, in itself, telling. Meanwhile, in the quiet hours of the night, Liam's real work continued. The reports from Mr. Chun were thorough and devastating. Julian Croft was not the financial wizard he pretended to be. He was a gambler, a day trader with a high-risk appetite and a string of near misses that had left his clients, mostly his and Isabella's wealthy friends, with significant losses he'd managed to explain away as market volatility. He was leveraged to the hilt, using his reputation and family connections to stay one step ahead of ruin. Liam's modest but stable assets were not just a target. They were a lifeline he desperately needed to cover his own impending losses. The report on Isabella was more painful. It included credit card statements filled with extravagant purchases, spa days, and expensive dinners with Mark, the tennis pro. She had been systematically draining their joint accounts for months, a slow bleed he would never have noticed with his focus on his larger ventures. And then there was the most damning discovery of all, a draft of a prenuptial agreement sent from Julian's email to Isabella's a week before their wedding, with the subject line, just in case Isabella had replied, "Don't be silly. He's simple. What's his mind? He's simple." The words echoed in his mind. That was the core of it. His quiet nature, his lack of ostentation, his decision to keep his professional life compartmentalized. They hadn't seen it as a choice, but as a limitation. They had mistaken humility for weakness, discretion for lack of ambition. The final piece of his plan was falling into place. His physical recovery was progressing faster than he let on. He could now walk the length of the hospital corridor unaided, but in front of his physical therapist, he would stumble, leaning heavily on the rails, complaining of dizziness. He needed them to underestimate his physical strength just as much as his mental acuity. He scheduled a meeting. Using his Sterling Designs email, he sent a message to Julian. "Julian, I've reviewed the documents. I am ready to sign, but I will not do so in this hospital. It is a place of sickness. I'm a builder. I wish to do this in a place of business, a place with a solid foundation. My office, tomorrow, 10 a.m., and bring the notary. We will settle everything." He signed it Liam. The simplicity of it was perfect. Julian's reply was almost instantaneous. "Of course, Liam. Excellent. A sign of your returning strength. We will be there." Liam could almost hear the triumphant smirk in the typed words. They would see it as his last, sentimental request, the whim of a broken man wanting one last look at his failed little business. They were walking into his world, a world they thought they knew, and they had no idea of its true dimensions. That night, Liam made 2 final calls. The first was to Maria, his office manager. The second was to Mr. Chun, who was already en route from Hong Kong on a private jet. "The stage is set," Liam said, his voice low and steady. "Are the final documents ready?" "They are a work of art, LS," Mr. Chun replied, his voice crackling slightly over the satellite phone. "Precise, unambiguous, devastating. Are you sure you are ready? This will be final." Liam looked out the hospital window at the sprawling city below, a tapestry of lights against the dark velvet of the night. So many of those lights were in buildings he had designed, buildings that would stand long after he was gone. He had built a legacy of strength, precision, and integrity. His personal life, however, had been built on a foundation of sand. It was time for a demolition. "I have never been more ready," Liam said, and ended the call. He felt a profound sense of calm, the quiet before the storm. Tomorrow, he would not be the patient in the bed. He would be the architect of a new reality, and the demolition was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. The morning of the meeting dawned bright and clear, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. For Liam, it felt like the first day of the rest of his life. The hospital discharged him with a litany of instructions and a wheelchair he was supposed to use, a final prop in his elaborate play. His parents, who had been briefed in a tearful, joyous reunion the night before, kept out of the loop until now to ensure their reactions were genuine, were there to pick him up. His father, a retired engineer with a quiet strength Liam had always admired, simply squeezed his shoulder. His mother, her eyes still shining with unshed tears, hugged him tightly. "I knew you were still in there, Liam," she whispered. "I always knew." They drove him not to his apartment, which he now knew was all but sold, but to the downtown office of Sterling Designs. It was a modest, 3-story brick building he had renovated himself, nestled between a gleaming skyscraper and a historic brownstone. It was a physical representation of his own ethos, respecting the past, building for the future. When Julian and Isabella arrived at precisely 10 a.m., they found Liam sitting in a large leather chair in the conference room. He was not in the wheelchair. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that his father had brought from home. He looked thinner, yes, but he also looked sharp, composed, and very much in control. The sight of him, so different from the pale, blanket-wrapped patient, gave them their first fleeting moment of pause. The conference room itself was Liam's sanctuary. One wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking a small, serene Japanese garden he had designed. The other walls were lined with dark mahogany shelves filled with architectural books and awards. In the center of the room was a massive table, a single slab of reclaimed oak, polished to a mirror shine. It was a room that spoke of quiet power and timeless taste. "Liam," Isabella said, her voice a little strained. She was wearing a chic, black maternity dress, and her pregnancy was now the most prominent thing about her. "You look better." "I'm feeling much improved," Liam said, his voice calm and even. He gestured to the chairs opposite him. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." Julian, recovering his swagger, strode in and placed his briefcase on the table with a confident thud. "Good to see you on your feet, Liam. A good sign. Shall we get to it?" "The notary is waiting downstairs." He began to pull out the same stack of documents from the hospital. "Those will not be necessary," Liam said quietly. Julian froze, his hands hovering over the papers. "I am sorry. Those documents are predicated on a false assumption," Liam continued, his gaze steady. "They assume a reality that does not exist." Isabella forced a laugh, a brittle, nervous sound. "Liam, darling, don't be dramatic. The doctor said you might have some confusion. These are the papers we discussed. To help you. To help me?" Liam repeated the words, letting them hang in the air. He looked from his wife's beautiful, strained face to her brother's suddenly wary expression. "Or to help yourselves?" Julian straightened up, his demeanor turning cold. "What's that supposed to mean? We've spent the better part of a year managing your affairs, protecting you." "Protecting me," Liam said, a small, humorless smile touching his lips. "Let's talk about your protection, Julian. Let's talk about the high-yield fund you wanted to sink my assets into. Is that the same fund you're using to desperately cover your short position on Omnicorp? I hear they're expecting a spectacular earnings report this quarter. That's going to sting." The color drained from Julian's face. He looked as if he'd been physically struck. How could you possibly know that? "I know you're leveraged with 3 different lenders, that you've been placating your increasingly anxious clients with fabricated reports, and that your entire financial house of cards is about to collapse," Liam said, his voice a quiet hammer, striking nail after nail. "Selling my apartment, and my car wasn't about my medical bills, was it? It was a desperate bid for liquidity. You weren't managing my portfolio. You were trying to raid it." "This is insane," Isabella whispered, looking back and forth between her brother and her husband. Liam, you're not well. On the contrary, Isabella. I have never been more well, Liam said, turning his cool gaze to her. My mind has never been clearer. I also know, for instance, that you conceived a child with your tennis instructor, Mark, approximately 8 weeks after my accident. You and Julian then conspired to pass this child off as my own, a miracle baby, while systematically seizing my assets under the guise of managing my care. The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if all the air had been sucked from the room. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated panic. Julian was frozen, a statue of guilt. The plan was quite thorough, Liam continued, his tone relentlessly calm. The texts to your friends, the emails with Julian, the credit card receipts for the hotel in the next town over. You were careless. You assumed I was simple. You assumed I was gone. As if on cue, the door to the conference room opened. A woman in a sharp suit entered, the notary Julian had brought. She looked flustered. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a gentleman here who insisted. Behind her stood Mr. Chun. He was an older man, small in stature, but he possessed an aura of immense authority. He was dressed in a simple, elegant silk suit, and his eyes, behind thin-rimmed glasses, were sharp and intelligent. He gave a slight, formal bow to Liam. Alas, Mr. Chun said, his voice quiet but resonant. I hope I am not late. You're right on time, Chun, Liam replied, a genuine warmth in his voice for the first time. Julian and Isabella stared at the newcomer, utterly bewildered. Us, Julian repeated, his voice a choked whisper. Who is LS? Liam leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the solid oak table. I am. He watched the confusion war with the dawning horror on their faces. Sterling Designs is my passion, Liam explained patiently, as if to a child. It's my connection to the craft, but it's not my business. My business is the L.S. Collective, a global design and development firm I co-founded with my partner, Mr. Chun, 12 years ago. Mr. Chun stepped forward and placed a sleek, impossibly thin tablet on the table. He tapped the screen, and a holographic projection of a breathtakingly futuristic city skyline shimmered into existence above the table. The Oasis Tower in Dubai, Liam said, gesturing to the tallest spire. The Chin Sterling Tidal Power Station in Singapore. The Helios Arcology Project in Arizona. These are a few of my less pedestrian ventures. He looked directly at Julian. My personal net worth, which you so arrogantly dismissed, is not measured in the low 7 figures you scraped from my public records. Your entire net worth, Julian, would be a rounding error on the catering budget for one of our project launches. The quiet bomb had detonated. The room was filled with the fallout of shattered arrogance and dawning catastrophe. Isabella had sunk into her chair, her face a mask of disbelief. Julian was swaying slightly on his feet, his bravado completely stripped away, leaving only the terrified, desperate gambler beneath. But how? Isabella stammered. You were just Liam, my Liam, the quiet architect. Liam's expression softened for a moment, a flicker of the old sadness in his eyes. Yes, he said. I wanted to be. I wanted someone to love that man. The man who liked to sketch in the park and renovate old buildings. I didn't want the money to be the reason. It seems I have my answer. He straightened up, the moment of softness gone, replaced by the cool efficiency of a CEO making a final decision. Now, to the matter at hand. The documents you brought are irrelevant. I have, however, prepared some new ones. He slid a single, elegant folder across the polished oak table. It stopped directly in front of Isabella. Those, Liam said, his voice devoid of all emotion, are divorce papers. They are generous, more generous than you deserve. They include a trust fund for your child, to be administered by a third party, ensuring their needs are always met. It is not an admission of paternity. It is an act of compassion for an innocent who is about to be born into a mess of your making. You will sign them. You will vacate my apartment, which is no longer for sale, by the end of the week, and you will disappear from my life. He then turned to Julian. As for you, You have committed fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft against the CEO of one of the largest private equity partners in your industry. Mr. Chin's firm has a significant stake in the bank that holds your loans. I can make one call, and your house of cards will cease to exist. Your career will be over. You will be ruined." Julian stared at him, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. "However," Liam continued, "I am offering you a different path. Not for your sake, but for Isabella's and for the memory of the family I thought I was joining. A second folder will be delivered to your office this afternoon. It contains a debt consolidation and repayment plan. You will sell your assets, all of them. You will work with a financial controller appointed by Mr. Chun. You will pay back every dollar you have lost of your client's money with interest. You will live modestly. You will learn humility. It is either that or total annihilation. The choice is yours." He stood up, the movement fluid and strong. He was no longer the patient. He was no longer the victim. He was Liam Sterling, and he was taking his life back. "The meeting is over," he said. He looked at Isabella one last time, at the woman he had loved, the woman who had so thoroughly and devastatingly betrayed him. There was no anger left, only a vast, empty space where his love had been. "I wish you a safe delivery, Isabella. Goodbye." With that, he turned his back on them and walked toward the glass wall overlooking his garden, the serene, ordered world he had built for himself. Mr. Chin followed, leaving Isabella and Julian alone in the silent room with the shimmering holographic city and the terrible, undeniable weight of their ruin. The immediate aftermath was a study in contrasts. Outside the conference room, life at Sterling Designs continued with its usual quiet hum. Maria, at the front desk, fielded a call about zoning permits, her voice a model of professional calm. Though she occasionally darted a glance toward the closed conference room door, her expression a mixture of fierce loyalty and anxious curiosity. Liam's parents sat in his private office, drinking tea, their presence a silent, solid anchor of support. Inside the conference room, however, the world had shattered. The holographic city, a testament to Liam's vision and power, still glowed above the table, a silent, glittering monument to their folly. Isabella sat motionless, the divorce papers untouched before her. Her mind, which had been so quick to calculate and conspire, was now a blank wall of shock. The entire reality she had constructed, her superior social standing, her brother's financial genius, her husband's simple-minded weakness, had been demolished in a matter of minutes. It was too much to process. Her thoughts were a frantic scramble, searching for a foothold, a way to reframe the narrative, but finding none. Liam's presentation had been too precise, too factual, too complete. There were no loopholes. Julian, on the other hand, had moved past shock into the frantic, desperate stage of bargaining. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, looking at the closed door through which Liam and Mr. Chan had departed. "He's not thinking clearly. Post-coma delusions. It's a known medical phenomenon. We can fight this." Isabella slowly turned her head to look at her brother. For the first time, she was not seeing the confident, swaggering financial prodigy. She was seeing a scared, cornered man, his expensive suit suddenly looking like costume. "Fight it with what, Julian?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Did you not see that man? Did you not hear him? He knew everything. Everything. Our texts, your trades. He even knew about the continuum, the name of the sculpture, a piece she had always despised, now sounded like a judgment. "He's bluffing," Julian insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. He paced the length of the room, his movements jerky and panicked. "The L.S. Collective, it's a ghost. A myth. A shell corporation in Panama. He can't be. Mr. Sterling is not known for bluffing." The voice came from the doorway. Mr. Chun had returned. He stood there, impassive, holding 2 glasses of water on a small silver tray. He placed one glass in front of Isabella. "You should drink," he said, his tone not unkind. "Stress is not good for the baby." The simple, humane gesture was more disarming than any threat. Isabella stared at the glass, her eyes filling with tears. "The baby," In all her scheming, the baby had been a pawn, a key to a future of wealth and freedom. Now, it was just a baby, an innocent life tied to her catastrophic mistakes. Mr. Chan then turned his gaze to Julian. It was like a blast of Arctic air. As for you, Mr. Croft, the L, as collective, is very real. And as of 90 minutes ago, it has acquired a controlling interest in the primary lending institution that holds your debt. Your bluff has been called. The choice Mr. Sterling offered you is no longer a negotiation. It is a lifeline. I suggest you take it. He placed a single, slim silver pen on the table next to the divorce papers. It was the same pen Liam had given Isabella, which she had carelessly left at the hospital. Liam must have given it to him. It lay there, gleaming, a symbol of everything they had misjudged and thrown away. You have 1 hour to sign, Mr. Chen said. After that, the offer of a managed repayment is rescinded, and I will be forced to begin asset seizure proceedings on behalf of my consortium. I will be in the adjacent office. Do not keep me waiting. He turned and left, closing the door with a soft, final click. The silence returned, heavier than before. Julian stared at the pen as if it were a venomous snake. The total annihilation Liam had spoken of was no longer a distant threat. It was a man in a silk suit waiting in the next room. What do we do? Julian whispered, his voice cracking. All his life, he had been the one with the answers, the one who could talk his way out of any problem. Now, he was utterly lost. Isabella looked at her brother, at the wreckage of their plans, at the beautiful, terrifying city glowing in the air. She thought of Liam, not the titan of industry who had just dismantled her life, but the man she had married. The man who would spend hours designing a perfect reading nook for her, because she'd once mentioned she liked to read by the window. The man who had held her hand for 3 hours in an emergency room, because she'd had a migraine. The man whose quiet strength she had mistaken for simplicity. She had had a diamond, and she had thrown it away, thinking it was glass. With a deep, shuddering sigh, she reached for the silver pen. Her hand was steady. The denial was over. The bargaining was over. All that was left was acceptance. She pulled the divorce papers toward her and uncapped the pen. We do what he said, she said, her voice clear and resolved for the first time that day. We sign. She looked at her brother, her eyes hard. You will sign too, Julian. You will take his deal. You will pay everyone back. This is the only way forward. Julian looked at her, his face a mask of despair. But Bella, everything, it's all gone. No, she said, as she brought the nib of the pen down to the signature line. It was never ours to begin with. Her signature was firm and clear. Isabella Croft, no longer Sterling. The first step on a long, uncertain road. She had lost a fortune, a husband, and a life she had taken for granted. But in that moment, signing away her future, she felt a strange, terrifying, and unfamiliar flicker of something else. Integrity. It was a foundation, she realized, and she would have to build from there. The weeks following the confrontation were a period of quiet, methodical reconstruction for Liam and chaotic deconstruction for Isabella and Julian. True to his word, Liam's focus was absolute. He had spent 10 months in the dark, and now, in the light, he moved with purpose and precision. The sale of his apartment was immediately canceled. The art collection was secured. He worked out of the Sterling Designs office, a place that now felt more like home than the grand, empty apartment he had once shared with Isabella. He divided his time between his two worlds. By day, he re-engaged with his small, local projects, finding solace in the tangible work of creating beautiful, functional spaces for ordinary people. He redesigned a community library pro bono, his hands flying across drafting paper, a joy he hadn't realized he'd missed. In the evenings, the LS Collective came online. Via encrypted video conferences that spanned the globe, he reasserted his leadership. There were new projects to approve, old ones to shepherd, and a global team that was overjoyed and relieved to have its visionary leader back at the helm. Mr. Chun remained by his side for the first few weeks, a quiet, steadfast presence, ensuring a smooth transition. They worked in a seamless partnership, one that had been forged over years of mutual respect and shared ambition. "You have changed, LS," Mr. Chin remarked one evening as they looked over the plans for a new sustainable housing project in South America. "Has my work suffered?" Liam asked, his focus still on the blueprints. "On the contrary," Mr. Chin said, "it has more conviction. Before, your genius was in the design. Now it is in the purpose. It is as if you're no longer just building structures, but building a legacy." Liam paused, looking up from the plans. "A foundation has to be tested to prove its strength, Chun. Mine was tested. I'm just rebuilding on bedrock now." For Isabella, there was no bedrock. She moved back in her parents' home, into the same frilly, pink and white bedroom she had grown up in. The contrast between her chic, curated life and this return to her adolescence was a daily humiliation. Her friends, the same ones who had encouraged her affair and her deception, now treated her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Luncheon invitations dried up. Her phone grew quiet. She was no longer the queen bee of her social circle. She was a cautionary tale. Her pregnancy, once a symbol of her supposed cunning, was now a constant, swelling reminder of her failure. Mark, the tennis pro, had vanished the moment rumors of the Sterling divorce began to circulate, leaving only a terse text message. "Sorry, can't be involved in this drama." She was alone. Her parents, well-meaning but utterly bewildered by the scale of the disaster, treated her like a fragile, disgraced child. They tiptoed around the subjects of Liam, the baby, and the future, their hushed whispers following her from room to room. Julian, meanwhile, was living his own personal nightmare. Liam's deal was not an act of forgiveness. It was a sentence of hard labor. The financial controller appointed by Mr. Chun was a ruthless, eagle-eyed woman who went by the name of Ms. Albright. She systematically dismantled Julian's life. His sport car was sold. His high-end condo was put on the market. His collection of expensive watches was auctioned off. He was given a strict monthly allowance, barely enough to cover rent on a modest apartment and basic living expenses. His days were spent not in a sleek trading office, but in a small, rented cubicle, working under Ms. Albright's unforgiving supervision. His task was to personally call every client he had ever misled and explain, in excruciating detail, the exact nature of his failed investments and the repayment plan that was now in place. Each call was an act of profound humiliation, stripping away another layer of his carefully constructed arrogance. He was no longer Julian Croft, the financial wizard. He was a debtor, and his penance was transparency. One evening, about a month after the meeting, Isabella found him on their parents' patio, staring blankly at the manicured lawn. He looked smaller, diminished, the expensive cut of his suit hanging limely on his frame. "They sold the condo today," he said without looking at her. "For less than I paid for it." Isabella said nothing, simply sitting in the chair beside him. "I had to call the Hendersons," he continued, his voice flat. "I lost nearly half of their retirement fund on a bad biotech bet. I had to tell them. I had to listen to Mrs. Henderson cry." He shook his head, a gesture of disbelief. "She didn't yell. She just cried. It was worse." He finally turned to look at Isabella, his eyes red-rimmed. "He could have just destroyed me. Liam. He could have bankrupted me, had me arrested. Why this? Why this slow, public execution?" "Because it's not an execution, Julian," Isabella said softly, surprising herself with the clarity of the thought. "It's a lesson. He's not destroying you. He's forcing you to rebuild. The right way." The understanding settled between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Liam's justice was not vengeful. It was architectural. He wasn't just tearing down their corrupt structures. He was forcing them to clear the rubble and lay a new, more honest foundation, brick by painful brick. It was a far more profound and far more difficult punishment than simple ruin. It was a demand for redemption. And as they sat there in the twilight, two fallen royals in their parents' gilded cage, they began to understand that the path back would not be measured in dollars, but in character. It was a currency they were only just beginning to learn. 6 months passed. The seasons turned. The sharp edges of the crisis began to soften into a new, altered landscape of life. Liam was thriving. He had fully stepped back into his role at the L.S. Collective, but with a new sense of balance. He no longer hid his success, but he didn't flaunt it either. He simply inhabited it, with the quiet confidence of a man who knows his own worth. He moved the headquarters of Sterling Designs into a larger, sunlit space in the same building, expanding the team and taking on more ambitious community-focused projects. He found that the two sides of his professional life, once kept so separate, actually enriched each other. The global perspective of the collective brought innovation to his local work, while the hands-on craft of Sterling Designs kept him grounded and connected to the human element of his profession. He had started dating tentatively at first. He met a woman named Dr. Eris Thorne, a curator at the city's Museum of Modern Art. She was brilliant, passionate, and had a laugh that filled the entire room. She knew him as Liam Sterling, the successful architect. When he eventually told her the full story of the L.S. Collective, she was more interested in the design philosophy behind the Helios arcology than the numbers in his bank account. So, the structure is designed to be a living biome, actively processing its own waste while maximizing solar gain through kinetic paneling. That's not just architecture, Liam, that's poetry, she had said, her eyes alight with genuine intellectual curiosity. For the first time in a long time, Liam felt seen, truly seen. One afternoon, he received a small, unassuming package at his office. Inside was a simple, framed photograph of a newborn baby, swaddled in a plain white blanket. The baby was beautiful, with a shock of dark hair. There was no note, but he knew who it was from. Isabella had given birth. He looked at the picture of the innocent child, a child who had been conceived in betrayal but was, in the end, just a new life beginning. He felt a pang, not of anger or sadness, but of a distant, detached compassion. He had the photo placed on a discreet shelf in his private office, a quiet reminder of the complex, messy path that had led him to where he was now. Isabella's path had been far more difficult. After the birth of her son, whom she named Noah, she hit her lowest point. The reality of single motherhood, stripped of wealth and social status, was a brutal shock. The sleepless nights, the relentless demands of a newborn, the isolation, it all conspired to break her. For weeks, she was adrift in a sea of postpartum depression and regret. Her turning point came unexpectedly. One night, while rocking a crying Noah, she caught a glimpse of herself in a mirror. She saw a tired, haggard woman, a ghost of her former self. But then she looked at the baby in her arms, who had finally quieted, his tiny hand gripping her finger. In his eyes, she was not a failure or a disgrace. She was his entire world. Something shifted within her. The next day, she enrolled in an online course for paralegal certification. It was a humbling start. The woman who once shopped on Fifth Avenue now spent her nights studying contract law and civil procedure. She sold the last of her designer handbags to pay for daycare. It was a slow, arduous climb. She made mistakes. She stumbled. But for the first time in her life, she was building something for herself by herself. Julian, too, was on a path of reconstruction. Under the watchful eye of Ms. Albright, he had successfully restructured and repaid a significant portion of his clients' losses. The work was grueling, and his life was a shadow of its former opulence. But a strange thing had happened. He had discovered he was actually good at the work when it wasn't about the thrill of the gamble, but about the slow, steady process of making things right. He started a small, personal blog, writing anonymously about financial ethics and learning from failure. It gained a small but dedicated following of people who appreciated its raw honesty. He was, for the first time, creating value instead of just chasing it. One crisp autumn evening, Liam and Eris were walking through a park, hand in hand. The setting sun cast long shadows, and the leaves were a riot of gold and red. They passed a playground, and Liam's eyes were drawn to a woman sitting on a bench, watching a small boy take his first wobbly steps on the grass. It was Isabella. She looked different. Her hair was a more natural shade, pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater, not a designer label in sight. But she looked content. She was smiling at the little boy, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. When Noah stumbled and fell, she didn't rush to him, but knelt down and encouraged him to get up on his own. He did, and giggled, and she clapped for him. She hadn't seen Liam. He and Eris were just two anonymous figures in the park. He stopped for a moment, watching this small, quiet scene of domestic life. There was no drama, no intrigue, just a mother and her son. Eris squeezed his hand. "What is it?" she asked softly. Liam watched as Isabella picked up her son, kissing his cheek, her face buried in his small frame. He saw not the woman who had betrayed him, but a person who had, against all odds, found a different kind of life. A harder life, perhaps, but a real one. His justice had not been about punishment, but about truth. He had forced them to live in the truth of their own actions. And from the looks of it, they were finally learning how. "It's nothing," Liam said, turning to Eris with a smile. "Just an old building that's been renovated. The foundation is solid now." He turned away from the past and walked on with Eris, into the warm light of the setting sun, his future bright and clear before him. He had learned that true strength wasn't about building impenetrable walls to keep others out, but about having a foundation so solid that you could afford to leave the doors and windows open, letting the light in no matter what storms may come. What a journey of transformation for everyone involved. It really goes to show that the most profound justice isn't always about revenge, but about creating an opportunity for true change. The best revenge, as they say, is living well, but maybe the truest victory is seeing that even those who wronged you can find a path to being better. What do you all think? Is this kind of justice more satisfying than pure,